Welcome to Talking Points. My name is Dr. Stephen E. Gardner. I'm here to welcome you to our new segment on the Self-Saboteur. Today we're going to deal with part 4. In part 4, we're going to look at some ways by which we can overcome self-defeating attitudes and behavior. We're going to look at ways by which we can overcome self-defeating attitudes and behavior. And there's a lot that can be said about the self-saboteur. As you know, in the first 3 segments, we talked about some of the problems, some of the examples of what self-sabotaging behavior is all about. And we could have gone a few more weeks to kind of give a list and kind of outline some of those things. But I wanted to be succinct, point out the problem, but now I want to focus on the solution. And so today we are going to talk about one of the things that I believe it's a really good solution in terms of overcoming self-defeating attitudes and behaviors, and that is called self-awareness. Self-awareness is the pathway to overcoming self-defeating attitudes and behavior. So let's go back and review some of the things that we've learned thus far in this series. The first thing that we learned is that self-sabotage refers to behaviors or thought patterns that hold you back and prevent you from doing what you want to do. Behaviors or thought patterns that have this ability to keep you from doing what you have intended or what you have purposed to do. Self-sabotage can be best described as this: is when we say we want to do something and then go about making sure that it doesn't happen. Now that sounds kind of an oxymoronish, if you want, if that's a word, but it's a dilemma that we say we want to do something, but then on the other hand, we go about and we undermine it. We go about and try to undo the very thing that we stated, or the very thing that we had mentioned that we want to commit to or move in that particular direction. Or it could be something that's already going on in your life that you're already committed to. Self-sabotage is it's a behavior and a mindset that tries to undo, that which will bring about success, that which will bring about fulfillment, that which will what? Validate and confirm and sustain the commitment that you've already made. Self-gaslighting, we learned, is when we've formulated this negative view of ourselves, verbalized that this is who we are, and then portray that we are this person. In essence, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. How? By formulating negative views of ourselves, verbalizing these negative views, and then we actually live out basically what we've said about ourselves. Part of overcoming self-sabotaging behavior is learning how to get out of our own way. Part of overcoming self-sabotaging behavior is learning how to get out of our own way. Because what we've learned, and we've all heard this, whether we've heard it in church or whether we heard it by, some motivational speaker, that in essence we are our own worst enemy. And when we say that we are our own worst enemy, we are validating that there are behaviors and thought patterns that sabotage us from, having the kind of desired future we want, to having the kind of success that we need, and so on and so forth. Even relationships, we can, we can undo relationships because of self-sabotaging behavior. So we have to learn how to get out of our own way. We have to learn what is the best way to move forward. But in order to do that, we need to identify some things that's going to help us. Now, we've talked about some of these problems already, the ones that we've mentioned here. But today, I want to highlight one solution that has a unique ability to help a person that has been involved in behaviors and thought patterns that have been undermining their progress or undermining their success. So we're going to talk about awareness, but before we go into awareness, or should I say specifically self-awareness, there are 4 important insights that I like to just discuss momentarily. Recognize what's holding you back from pursuing happiness and well-being. What's holding you back from pursuing happiness and well-being? Oftentimes we have pointed the finger and we've pointed at a person, or we pointed at a system, or we've pointed at some generational outcome that we might experience, some sort of generational trauma. Recognize what's holding you back from pursuing happiness and well-being. When it comes to traumatic experiences and the like, many times we experience these things not because that's something we brought upon ourselves, but because maybe some system or someone or someone's brought it upon me. And so therefore I am dealing and grappling with the consequences of that type of trauma, or the consequences of that type of behavior or patterns of behavior that's directed towards me. The question is, recognize what's holding you back. And so if trauma is holding me back, if some other system is holding me back, then the question comes to play, what can I do to change the outcome of what's happening to me? What can I do to pursue my happiness and my well-being? What can I do that will stop me from pointing the finger at someone else as being my problem, but rather I need to find out, even when I've been wronged, I need to find out what my response should be. Because what happens a lot of times, which is self-sabotaging behavior, is what I call the victim mentality. And people harbor victim mentalities because what they're really seeking is attention. And many times they're not really concerned about whether they get out or not, but they glory or they relish in the attention that they get because they are operating from a victim mentality. But when that individual really says, hey, enough's enough, I need to no longer be dominated by this, we need to recognize what's holding us back from pursuing our well-being, happiness as well. Second important insight is recognizing that failing at something isn't the end of the world. One of the things that happens, with those who are prone to perfection or perfectionism, one of the things that happens is that because they didn't get it right the first time, sometimes they spiral into depression because they've held such a high bar upon themselves that they are unrealistic in in how they treat themselves when they can't make that particular goal. And so they spiral downward, or they want to give up altogether, or they cop an attitude. But we need to recognize that failing at something isn't the end of the world. In fact, many times failure is fertilizer for the future. Failure is fertilizer for the future. If we, first of all, acknowledge that it's not the end of the world, and two, acknowledge what can I do to do better. There's no person that's out there that's ever been successful at something that did not make a boatload full of mistakes along the way. I don't care what millionaire, I don't care what successful company or what successful individual, regardless of whatever field or industry that they're in, even if they're in sports, lots of training, and guess what? Lots of mistakes. And we can't let our mistakes convince us that it's the end of the world. Oh, woe is me. Nothing's going to ever come out of this. I'm not going to ever amount to anything. That is that self-sabotaging mindset. And so we have to pause and recognize, look, I'm going to overcome this. I'm going to overcome this tendency to think that the world, that everything is coming to an end. I'm going to overcome this apocalyptic mentality that I have about my own world. Recognize that failing at something isn't the end of the world. Thirdly, understand that what others think of you is far less important than what you think of yourself. Ain't that the truth? Because, you know, some things we hear from people and they're going to criticize you when you're doing right, and they're going to criticize you when you're doing wrong. You know, when you're doing and you're successful, people talk about you because they're envious. Or when you're not doing so well, people find a reason to say what they want to say about you because that makes them feel better that they are not where you are. You know, like in the Gospels, it says that this person came down to pray, and he says, I thank God I'm not like this, you know, beggar that's over here. You know, he thought of himself more highly than he ought. And he had an opinion about this person there who basically gave all that they had. And sometimes when we're not able to produce at the level, or we're not able to have the gold and the trinkets and all the wealth that people have at the next level, if you want to put it in the hierarchical status, we think less of ourselves because of how other people have projected onto maybe my quote-unquote social economic status. You know, sometimes these labels, we gotta stop listening to what these labels are, because if we believe all these labels about ourselves, then how will I ever have hope myself of overcoming any barrier that might be either perceived or actual? Understand that what others think of you is far less important than what you think of yourself. We should always have a high view of ourselves, but not to the point that I'm intoxicated with myself and that everything is always about me. Everything is always about me. We have to come and think soberly that the world does not revolve around us. We're part of the same orbit, and we all have a responsibility, and we all have things that we need to overcome, especially self-sabotaging behavior. Fourth, considering that whatever difficulties you experienced in the past lack the power to predict your future unless you let them. Whatever difficulties you experienced in the past, they have no power to predict your future. unless you allow it to be. Unless you say, okay, I failed there, so therefore I'm a failure, and therefore I'm not going to amount to anything. We have the power to control what happens in the future if we consider that whatever difficulties that we've experienced in the past, that they lack the power to predict the future. That's just something for us to think about. So these are 4 important insights before we get into self-awareness. Now, we've heard the old adage, know thyself. And so self-awareness is one of the abilities that it will enable us to overcome self-sabotaging behavior. Self-awareness is a conscious knowledge of one's own character, feelings, motives, and desires. Pay close attention to this definition. It's a conscious knowledge. Are you aware of your own character? Are you aware of your feelings, your motives, and your desires? Or do you just kind of go with the flow? Or do you just kind of just, whatever presents itself, I live in the moment only. I don't give any regard to the future. Self-awareness can be best described as the ability to tune into your feelings, thoughts, and actions. Being self-aware also means being able to recognize how other people see you. Oh, that's a huge one. Many times we don't know how other people really see us or how other people really perceive us because we have not been self-aware. Self-aware has the unique ability to look at yourself through the eyes of others. Wow, ain't that deep? I can see how others see me. Well, I got to, first of all, have a good sober mindedness about myself. And if I'm really self-aware, I can perceive how other people see me. Maybe I might learn some things that I might need to adjust so that I can be a better version of myself in the future. People who are self-aware, guess what? They recognize their strengths and they also recognize their challenges. So, self-awareness is the pathway to overcoming self-defeating attitudes and behavior. Back in April of 2017, the Myers-Briggs Company, they conducted a study on self-awareness. And they had 937 respondents who were questioned about the advantages and disadvantages of self-awareness. And from the questionnaire, 84% of respondents said it was important to them or important for them to monitor their own mental state. Let me say that again. 87% of the respondents said that it was important for them to monitor their mental state. That just shows you that self-awareness does have some salvific ability. And if 87% of the people think this way, then there's something that we can learn by incorporating it or engaging in some sort of self-awareness type activity. 78% enjoyed exploring their inner self. How many of us spend time on the inside, exploring from within? How many times have we explored the interior? Most of the time we deal with the exterior. Even for people of faith, it's about the external expressions of worship, and rarely is it about engaging with the God that's already in the inside of you. Exploring the inner self. 98% said that it was important to understand why people behave the way they do. Obviously, self-awareness helps us to understand who we are, but maybe by understanding who we are and how we tick, that we have a better way of really evaluating other people without necessarily judging them, but again, following the pathway that Jesus recommended. Get the mote out of your eye first, then you can see clearly. And so, knowing thyself is about knowing what's in my own eye. It's about knowing what's blocking my view. It's about knowing what's clouding my vision. We all, in some ways, our vision is clouded, either by bias or by upbringing or by something else. Being self-aware, I'm able to what? Overcome my biases. Because bias can also be what? A self-sabotaging behavior and mindset. Because why? I won't treat that other person fair. I won't give that other person, the props that they need. Or I just won't navigate in life, with a sober mind. Because why? I've got this skewed view that's coming from some warped ideas about the world around me. Getting the mote of my own eye, I'm able to understand not only myself, but I'm also able to understand why people do what they do. The study that the Myers-Briggs company conducted further revealed that the number one advantage of self-awareness is understanding reactions and motivation, followed by management of self, others, choices, and lastly, adapting behaviors and improving relationships. So the number one advantage of self-awareness is understanding reactions and motivation. Why I do what I do. That's one of the key things that we need to, in order to unlearn something, you have to be aware that you've learned something. I know that sounds kind of cliche there. In order to unlearn something, you have to acknowledge what you have learned. And sometimes learned behavior, in order to unlearn it, you have to acknowledge that it exists. If I was to tell you that you were a racist, and you were to tell me that you aren't a racist, and I went on to explain what a racist's actions and motivations are, you might come to the conclusion, wow, I didn't realize that I was a racist. The number one advantage of self-awareness is understanding reactions and motivations, followed by management of self, others, and also choices. And lastly, adapting behaviors and improving relationships. It's worth noting that self-awareness can help people to avoid unpleasant, negative experiences or mistakes. As a counterpoint, the biggest reported disadvantage of self-awareness from this study was overthinking or overanalyzing. So there got to be some balance. So there's value in self-awareness, but when we go self-awareness to the point that we're overthinking or overanalyzing, then it's like going from one side of from the ditch on one side of self-sabotage behavior to the ditch on the other side, which also winds up being self-sabotaging behavior. Overthinking and overanalyze is on the other side of the road. So we have to try to do our best to stay in the middle. And being self-aware does give us this opportunity to have a sober outlook of ourselves and a sober outlook of the world around us. And the other thing it does? We also become aware of our own conspiracy theories that we have about the world around us. And we find out that many of the conspiracy theories we have to do with someone having informed us and shaped our way of thinking. And that could come from a myriad of things, upbringing, religion, and so on and so forth. We tend to have this emergence of conspiracy theories. And obviously, we've seen a lot of that's happened in the 2020 and 2021 in regards to the COVID outcome and so on and so forth. And, other things that we acknowledge politically. You have seen the emergence of all these conspiracy theories. And none of these conspiracy theories have any grounding or have any footing. They're all based upon what? Somebody's fear. Most conspiracy theories are fear-based. And so self-awareness helps me to what? Peer within, to look on the inside of you and find out, am I motivated by some fear or by some coercion that may come from, somebody that I look up to or some group that I look up to. Whatever the case it might be, self-awareness can help us avoid unpleasant, negative experiences and mistakes. Okay, let's make this simple. Self-awareness is the pathway to understanding who you are and the key to knowing what makes you do the things that you do. With that being said, it should be very clear that in order to overcome thyself, you have to know thyself. There are 3 categories of self-awareness, and you can find more about this whole self-awareness teaching because I drew a lot of this information from this particular website, myquestionlife.com. And when you get to that website, you can go and plug in self-awareness, and it'll take you to, some of the things that researcher came about discovering. And one of the things that they mentioned in that particular article is that there are 3 categories of self-awareness. Number 1, what am I feeling? Number 2, what am I thinking? And number 3, what am I doing? Well, let's begin to look at 4 ideas that would help us better see the value of self-awareness in terms of overcoming self-sabotaging behavior. Number 1, identifying your emotions and what you're feeling. That is what self-awareness does. It helps you identify your emotions and what you're feeling. Whether you're feeling anger, whether you're feeling fear, sadness, or joy. Self-awareness helps you to recognize your emotional triggers and coping mechanisms. Being able to recognize why we get defensive and how we show it an impactful example. Or let me put it this way, that an impactful example of self-awareness is to recognize your emotional triggers. And when you can recognize why you get defensive, then you are clearly, you're self-aware. Why am I triggered by this? Or what's your coping mechanism? One of the, in grief work, there are things that we call triggers, and there are things we call coping skills. And that's probably one of the best places, or it's not one of the best places, but it's one of those places where you can see both, where you can see what emotional triggers are, and you can see what coping mechanisms. People are going to be triggered by certain things. For example, if you had a bad experience, say at your state fair or at some carnival, and that's an emotional trigger every time that you hear about the state fair. In fact, you probably have concluded in your own mind that I don't want to go because why? Something happened to me that made me feel this way. And every time that I think about this particular thing or this particular activity, I feel a certain way. On the other hand, coping mechanisms are things that we've learned to help us manage our discomfort. There are things we've learned to help us manage our discomfort. Even when you have an emotional trigger, you might find a way to manage your discomfort by some coping skill, by maybe counting to 10 and holding your breath, something as simple as that. Deep breathing exercises help you to calm yourself down. You know, I know one of the things that I always run into whenever I got to go to the doctor and I have an appointment, you know, when I check my blood pressure and all that at home, it's normal. But when I get to the doctor, I don't care if I'm just driving the normal speed. When they check my blood pressure at the doctor, guess what? It's elevated. So what they'll do is they'll tell me, hey, look, we'll check your blood pressure again in about 5 or 10 minutes. And during that time, what I do is that I know why I'm triggered. It's called the white coat syndrome. Nobody likes going to the doctor because you always think you're going to hear bad news. Why? Because we probably heard bad news in the past. The point is that what I've done, what I've learned to calm myself down is do some deep breathing exercises and slow my breathing down. And what that does, it brings my heart rate down. It's a coping mechanism because why? I'm triggered by being in this doctor's office that I really don't want to be there. Are y'all following what I'm saying? And when they come back to check my blood pressure, guess what? It's normal. So, thirdly, defining your own beliefs without being influenced by others. Self-awareness is your ability to distinguish your own beliefs from others. Do I need to say that again? Self-awareness is your ability to distinguish your own beliefs from others. You can step back and ask yourself, am I being true to myself at this moment? Maybe I'm living out the ideas and beliefs of somebody else. Maybe they're not my own. Maybe I'm subject to being a people pleaser. Or I've got to do things the way that I've been taught to do them, even though I may feel that this is not true to who I really am. But because it's suggested that I do this, because it's enforced that I do this, then what happens is that I'm not being true to who I really am. Now, I know we can probably elaborate upon that, but it's the most simplest way to understand how self-awareness helps here is it's the ability to distinguish between your own beliefs and those of others. A person, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink it. You know, it doesn't matter how much truth you tell a person, they got to want it bad enough so they can participate. You can provide a buffet of options out there, and yet that's all you can do in many cases. But it's the option that they choose to adopt. That's the one they're going to be committed to. That's the same way we need to begin to do an internal inspection of our own beliefs, distinguishing it from others. Now, I'm not saying we should not, that there is a devaluation of who we are by, following the direction or guidance of someone else. But it's to the point to where I don't know who I am. And the beliefs that I have have been given to me, have been passed on to me. I don't know who I am. Self-awareness answers the question of who I am. And lastly, number 4, acknowledging what your core values are This is a practical function of self-awareness. I personally believe that one of the ways of overcoming self-sabotaging behavior is to have established your own set of core values. What's your personal mantra? Whether it be scripture, or whether it be some positive notion, or whether it be something else. What are your core values? So I would encourage you, ask yourself the question, what are your core values? Write them down. And when you begin to explore what your core values are, you are engaging in self-awareness. Now that you know what your core values are, begin to do the very best you can to stay true to those core values, to stay true to how you see the world around you, to stay true to yourself and treat others the way you want to be treated. Clearly, this is a way that eliminates and paves the way for eliminating self-sabotaging behavior. Well, I trust that you've been informed today about self-awareness and how it helps us to deal with those mindsets and those behaviors that tend to hold us back. Let's get to know who we are. Let's treat others the way you want to be treated. And there's a whole lot more we can say and that we're going to say about the self-saboteur. So come back on part 5 as we explore a little bit further on some of the transformative approaches to overcoming self-sabotaging behavior. God bless you. We'll talk to you then.